Once upon a time, in the quiet, whispering hills of Oba village, there was a boy named Kelechi. Unlike other children who spent their days running through the fields or chasing after goats, Kelechi's life was different, very different. Since the moment he was born, he had never stepped foot outside his house, not even once. His world was a dim, shadow-filled room, where the windows were always shut tight and the doors were locked from the outside. The villagers often whispered about the boy, though none had ever seen him. They spoke in hushed tones at the market, during long walks home, or while tending their crops, always curious, but too afraid to ask directly. "Why do they hide him?" the women would murmur as they fetched water from the river. "Is he sick? Cursed?" The men, less prone to gossip but equally curious, wondered silently, nodding knowingly when someone mentioned the child no one had ever laid eyes on. Kelechi's father, Obinna, was a quiet man who rarely spoke, preferring the company of his tools and the earth. He kept to himself, working the farm with a grim focus, as if there was something he needed to distract himself from. His mother, Adaeze, was more visible, appearing at the village market every week, her face drawn tight with worry. The lines around her eyes deepened with each passing year, and though people tried to ask her about Kelechi, she always gave the same response. "He's sick. It's for his own good." But the truth was far more complicated. Kelechi wasn't sick, not in the way the villagers imagined. He was different, yes, but not from an illness. His skin was almost as pale as the moon on a clear night, so white it seemed almost translucent, and his eyes were the color of ice, a piercing blue that glowed faintly in the dark, as though they held some hidden light within them. His parents had raised him in a world of shadows, fearful of what might happen if he ever stepped out into the light. As he grew older, Kelechi began to wonder why. At 15, Kelechi was no longer a child, though he still felt like one trapped in his prison of walls and secrets. He spent his days poring over old, tattered books, anything his parents could bring him from the outside world. He had read of rivers that sparkled in the sunlight, forests filled with wild creatures, and skies that stretched endlessly beyond the horizon. But all of that was nothing more than stories to him. He had never seen them for himself, never breathed the open air, or felt the sun on his skin. The only person allowed to see him was Chinyonso, the son of the village's chief priest. Chinyonso had been coming to visit Kelechi for as long as Kelechi could remember, a friendship that had grown from childhood, even if it was one filled with secrets and shadows. They were the same age, but Chinyonso, with his deep brown skin and bright, curious eyes, had the freedom Kelechi could only dream of. Chinyonso often brought tales from the outside world, stories of the river, of the village festivals, and of adventures in the forest. But Kelechi wanted more than just stories. One hot afternoon, as the cicadas buzzed outside and the heat pressed down heavily on the village, Chinyonso arrived at Kelechi's house, his usual playful grin replaced with something more mischievous. He sat on the floor of Kelechi's dimly lit room, his face glowing with excitement, the kind of excitement that Kelechi could always sense was trouble. "Kelechi," Chinyonso whispered, leaning in close as though he was about to reveal a great secret. "There's something I need to show you." Kelechi, who had been lost in the pages of an old book about the great rivers of the south, looked up, intrigued. "What is it?" he asked, already knowing that whatever it was, it would be something he couldn't resist. Chinyonso's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I found something in the forest, not far from here. You'd love it." Kelechi's heart skipped a beat. The forest. That was something he had only ever dreamed of, a place that lived in Chinyonso's stories but was forbidden to him. His parents had always warned him, had always kept him locked away. But the curiosity that burned in his chest wouldn't be silenced. The forest was a world of mystery and wonder, filled with life beyond the dim walls of his home. "What did you find?" Kelechi asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though the excitement surged within him. Chinonso grinned. "Puppies," he whispered. "Stray dogs. I found them a few days ago, hidden in a den deep in the woods. They're wild, but they don't bite. You'll love them." Kelechi's breath caught in his throat. Puppies. He had read about them and seen pictures in books, but he had never seen a real one. His parents had never allowed him to have a pet, saying it was too dangerous. But now, the temptation was too great. "I don't know, Chinonso." Kelechi hesitated, glancing at the locked door that led outside. "You know my parents." "Your parents won't know," Chinonso interrupted, his tone both persuasive and daring. "We'll be quick. We'll go now, and you'll be back before they even notice." Kelechi swallowed hard, his mind racing with the possibility. He could finally see the outside world, even if just for a few minutes. He glanced at the small, dusty window, where a faint sliver of sunlight peeked through the curtain. It felt like a prison, and the forest, a world he had only dreamed of, was just beyond it. "All right," Kelechi whispered, feeling a rush of adrenaline. "Let's go." With a slow, deliberate motion, Chinonso moved toward the door, unlocking it with a key Kelechi hadn't even known his friend possessed. As the door creaked open, Kelechi felt a strange mix of fear and excitement rising inside him. He had never stepped outside before, never felt the breeze on his face or the warmth of the sun on his skin. The sunlight hit Kelechi's face for the first time, and it was overwhelming. It wasn't the soft, muted light that crept through the curtains in his room. It was blinding, bright, and too real. He shielded his eyes with his hand, feeling the unfamiliar warmth of the sun burn against his skin. It was a foreign sensation, almost painful. Chinonso noticed the discomfort on his friend's face. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle but tinged with excitement. Kelechi nodded, though his eyes were still struggling to adjust. "I'll be fine," he muttered, his voice strained. His feet moved slowly, cautiously, as though the earth beneath him was unsteady and unfamiliar. His bare feet touched the warm ground, and the sounds of the village filled his ears. The distant chatter of women, the laughter of children, the bleating of goats. It was all new to him, overwhelming, yet intoxicating. As they walked through the village, Kelechi felt the eyes of the villagers on him. He tried not to look, but he could feel their stares, the shock, the curiosity, and the fear. He was something strange to them, a ghostly figure who didn't belong. "Is that Obina's son?" one woman whispered, loud enough for Kelechi to hear. "I thought he was sick." "Look at his skin," another voice murmured. "So pale." Kelechi's heart raced. He felt like an outsider, a creature that didn't belong among these people. But Chinonso didn't seem to notice, or perhaps he didn't care. He led Kelechi toward the edge of the village, toward the forest that had always seemed like a distant dream. The trees loomed tall and dark as they approached the forest's edge, casting long shadows over the ground. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest, the anticipation mingling with fear. He had heard stories about the forest, about wild animals and mysterious places no one dared to go, but now, here he was, standing at the threshold of that unknown world. "Come on," Chinonso urged, his voice filled with excitement. "We're almost there." As they ventured deeper into the forest, the air grew cooler, and Kelechi felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The darkness of the woods, the way the light filtered through the canopy above, it felt familiar, comforting even. It was as though the shadows themselves were embracing him, welcoming him in a way the outside world hadn't. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the den Chinonso had spoken of, a small hollow in the ground, hidden beneath a tangle of roots and leaves. Inside, Kelechi could see the puppies, just as Chinonso had promised. They were small, scruffy little things, their fur matted and wild. They yipped and wagged their tails as Chinonso knelt down to pet them. Kelechi watched in awe, his heart swelling with a mixture of joy and wonder. Slowly, cautiously, he reached out to touch one of the puppies. Its fur was soft, warm under his fingers, and for the first time in his life, Kelechi felt connected to something real, something alive. But that joy was short-lived. As Kelechi stroked the puppy, something strange happened. Its breathing slowed, and its small body stiffened. Kelechi's smile faded, his hand trembling as he realized the puppy had gone limp in his hand. "Chinonso, what's happening?" Kelechi whispered, panic rising in his voice. Chinonso looked up, his face paling as he stared at the lifeless puppy in Kelechi's hand. I don't know," he stammered, backing away. Kelechi's heart raced as he looked at the other puppies, and, to his horror, they too began to collapse, one by one, their bodies crumpling into the dirt as if something had drained the life from them. The forest grew eerily silent. Kelechi stumbled back, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. He looked down at his hands, his pale, almost translucent hands that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the forest. "What did I do?" Kelechi whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Chinonso stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. "We need to leave," he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. As they turned to run, the weight of something far darker and more terrifying pressed down on Kelechi. The world he had been so eager to see was now a place of horror, and for the first time, Kelechi understood why his parents had kept him hidden. He wasn't normal, he was cursed. The sprint back through the forest was a blur, branches clawing at Kelechi's arms as he and Chinonso tore through the undergrowth. Every sound seemed amplified, the rustling of leaves, the distant cawing of birds and their own labored breathing. But Kelechi's mind was somewhere else entirely, locked on the image of the dead puppies, their bodies limp and cold under his touch. His hands, the very things he had always thought of as innocent, felt like the instruments of something terrible. What was he? They burst out of the forest, and the sudden warmth of the village air felt oppressive. Kelechi barely noticed the stares of the villagers this time as they raced past. The whispers, the murmurs of shock and curiosity didn't register. All that mattered was getting home, getting away from the world that now seemed to recoil from him. Chinonso, normally so confident and full of life, was unnaturally quiet as they reached Kelechi's house. His usual mischievous grin was gone, replaced by a look of unease and fear. He glanced at Kelechi, but neither of them could bring themselves to speak. There was nothing to say. Kelechi opened the door to the house, and the two boys slipped inside, closing it behind them as if shutting out the rest of the world. For a long moment, they stood in the dimly lit room, the silence pressing down on them. Kelechi's mind raced with questions, but none of them made sense. What had just happened? Why did everything he touched seem to die? Finally, Chinonso broke the silence, his voice shaky. "We need to tell your parents." Kelechi flinched at the suggestion. The last thing he wanted was to involve his parents, especially his father. Obinna was a stern man, full of old superstitions and strict beliefs. Kelechi feared what he might say, what he might do if he knew what had happened in the forest. "No," Kelechi muttered, shaking his head. "We can't tell them." "But Kelechi," Chinonso hesitated, his voice low. "Something's not right. This isn't normal. They'll know what to do." Kelechi swallowed hard, his throat tight with fear. He had been kept in the dark for so long, sheltered from the world outside. His parents always told him it was for his own safety. But now, he wasn't so sure. He wasn't sure of anything anymore. "Fine," Kelechi whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'll talk to my mother first. Maybe she'll understand." The house was unusually quiet, a thick, oppressive silence hanging in the air. Kelechi's parents were often out working, but today, the stillness felt heavier, as though the walls themselves knew that something was wrong. Kelechi motioned for Chinonso to wait in his room while he went in search of his mother. He found Adize sitting at the kitchen table, her hands busy shelling peas for dinner. though her face was clouded with worry. Kelechi stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her. She looked older today, her brow furrowed, her eyes distant. It was as if the weight of whatever secret she carried was finally starting to show. "Mama," Kelechi said quietly, stepping into the room. Adaeze looked up, startled. "Kelechi, what is it? You look pale. Have you been outside?" Her voice was laced with concern, but there was also a hint of fear. Fear of what his answer might be. Kelechi hesitated, his stomach twisting in knots. I went with Chinonso. We went to the forest." Adaze's eyes widened, and her hands froze mid-motion. The peas she had been shelling rolled across the table, forgotten. "You went outside?" she repeated, her voice trembling. Kelechi nodded, feeling the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "We found puppies," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "I touched one of them, and it died, Mama. Then all the others did too. And..." His voice caught in his throat. "I touched an old man on the way back. He died too." For a moment, Adaeze said nothing. She simply stared at her son, her face drained of color, her eyes wide with disbelief and something else, something darker. Fear. Real, raw fear. "Kelechi," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "You shouldn't have gone outside. You weren't ready." "Ready for what?" Kelechi demanded, his voice rising. "What's wrong with me, Mama? Why does everything I touch die?" Adaze's hands trembled, and for the first time in Kelechi's life, he saw her break. Her usually strong, composed exterior crumbled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She had always been the anchor in the family, the one who held everything together. But now, Kelechi saw the cracks beneath the surface. "I didn't want you to know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want you to suffer the way your father and I have." Kelechi's heart raced. "Know what?" he asked, his voice tight with desperation. Adaeze took a deep, shuddering breath and looked up at her son, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. "Before you were born," she began slowly, "your father and I, we couldn't have children. We tried for years, but nothing worked. We were desperate, so we went to the gods. We begged them for a child. We prayed. We offered sacrifices, and finally they answered. But they warned us that there would be a price." Kelechi's blood ran cold. "A price?" he whispered. Adaeze nodded, her tears spilling down her cheeks. "They told us that you would be different, that your life would be a gift, but it would come with a curse. You carry the power of life and death in your hands, Kelechi. It's why we've kept you hidden, why we've tried to protect you from the world outside. We wanted to keep you safe." Kelechi staggered back, the weight of his mother's words crashing down on him like a wave. A curse. He was cursed. The truth he had been searching for all his life had been hidden from him, locked away like he was in the shadows of their home. "But why?" Kelechi asked, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you keep me locked up like some kind of prisoner?" Adaeze's sobs grew louder, and she buried her face in her hands. "Because we were afraid. Afraid of what you might become. Afraid of what the curse would do to you. We thought we could protect you from it if we kept you hidden." Kelechi felt a surge of anger rise within him. His whole life had been a lie. His parents had known about the curse, and yet they had said nothing. They had let him believe he was normal, only to reveal the truth when it was already too late. "I deserve to know the truth!" Kelechi shouted, his fists clenched at his sides. "I deserve to know what I am!" Adaeze looked up at him, her eyes filled with pain. "We were trying to protect you, Kelechi. We thought it was the only way." Kelechi turned away, his chest heaving with a mixture of anger and grief. "I don't need protection," he muttered, his voice cold. "I need answers." Before Adaeze could respond, the door creaked open, and Obinna stepped into the room. His expression was hard, his jaw tight as he looked between his wife and son. "What's going on here?" Obinna asked, his voice low and serious. Kelechi stood up straight, his fists still clenched, and met his father's gaze. "I want the truth, Papa," he said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "No more lies. Why am I kept locked up in this house? What's wrong with me?" Obinna's face tightened, and he glanced at Adese, who was still weeping at the table. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with secrets long buried. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Obinna spoke. "You already know the truth, Kelechi," he said slowly, his voice grave. "The gods gave you life, but they also cursed you. Your touch brings death. That's why we've kept you hidden, to protect you and the people around you." Kelechi's hands shook as he stared at his father. "But why me?" he demanded. "Why was I cursed? What did I do?" Obinna's jaw clenched, and he looked away, his face clouded with guilt. "It's not what you did, son," he muttered. "It's what we did." Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest. "What do you mean?" Obinna took a deep breath, his eyes dark with regret. "Before you were born, your mother and I made a deal with the gods. We were desperate for a child, so we offered them everything we had. They accepted our offerings, but in return, they warned us that our child would be different. We knew there would be consequences, but we didn't understand." His voice trailed off, and for a moment, the room was silent again. Kelechi felt a cold dread settling over him. His life, his very existence, had been shaped by a deal made long before he was born. A deal that had come at a terrible cost. "So it's true," Kelechi whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm cursed." Obinna nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Yes, Kelechi. You carry the curse of life and death in your hands. It's a power that no one should have to bear, but it's your burden now." Kelechi turned away, his mind spinning. He had always suspected there was something different about him, something his parents were hiding, but he had never imagined it would be something like this. The truth was too much to bear. "I can't stay here," Kelechi muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "Kelechi, wait," Adese said, her voice filled with fear. "Where are you going?" But Kelechi didn't answer. He was already walking out the door, his mind made up. He couldn't stay in that house any longer, surrounded by the lies and secrets that had kept him trapped his whole life. Chinonso, who had been waiting in Kelechi's room, stood up as he saw his friend storm out. "Kelechi, where are you going?" he asked, rushing after him. "I need answers," Kelechi replied, his voice cold. "Real answers, and I'm not going to get them here." Chinonso frowned, his concern growing. "What do you mean? What happened?" Kelechi stopped and looked at his friend, his eyes filled with determination. "The chief priest. He knows something. I'm going to him." Chinonso hesitated, unsure of what to do. He could see the anger and pain in Kelechi's eyes, but he also knew that this was a dangerous path. The chief priest was a man of secrets and ancient knowledge, and whatever he knew might not be easy to accept. "I'll come with you," Chinonso said firmly. Kelechi nodded, grateful for his friend's loyalty, and together they made their way to the chief priest's house. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the village, and the air was thick with tension. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest as they approached the chief priest's home. The chief priest, an elderly man with a weathered face and sharp eyes, was sitting outside his house, chewing on a kola nut. He looked up as Kelechi and Chinonso approached, his expression unreadable. "Kelechi," the chief priest said slowly, his voice calm but full of warning. "What brings you here?" "I need answers," Kelechi replied, his voice steady but strained. "About the curse, about why I've been kept locked away my whole life." The chief priest studied him for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "You've spoken to your parents, I assume?" Kelechi nodded. "They told me about the deal with the gods, about the curse, but they didn't tell me everything. The chief priest sighed, his gaze softening slightly. Some things are better left in the shadows, Kelechi. The truth can be a heavy burden to carry. I don't care, Kelechi snapped, his anger rising again. I need to know. The chief priest's eyes flickered with something, pity perhaps, or regret. Very well, he said quietly. But know this, boy. The truth you seek may not bring you the peace you're looking for. Kelechi's hands trembled at his sides, but he stood his ground. I'm ready. The chief priest stood slowly, motioning for them to follow him inside his hut. The interior was dark, lit only by the flickering light of a small fire. Shelves lined the walls, filled with ancient scrolls and jars of mysterious herbs. The air was thick with the smell of incense, and a strange sense of foreboding hung over the room. The chief priest sat down on a woven mat, gesturing for Kelechi and Chinonso to sit as well. For a moment he said nothing, simply staring into the fire as if searching for the right words. Finally he spoke. Your parents told you the gods gave you life, but they also gave you a curse. That much is true, but the reason for that curse lies deeper than you think. It is not just a punishment for your parents' desperation. It is a punishment for a betrayal long ago. Kelechi frowned, his heart pounding. A betrayal? The chief priest nodded. Your bloodline is cursed, Kelechi. It goes back generations. Long ago, before even your grandparents were born, your family wronged the gods. They betrayed a sacred oath, and in their wrath, the gods cursed your entire line. Kelechi's chest tightened, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. What did they do? The chief priest's eyes darkened, his voice low. Your ancestor, a king of Oba, made a deal with the gods for power. He promised them devotion, offerings, and the souls of his enemies. But when the time came to pay the price, he refused. He broke the pact, and in their anger, the gods cursed his descendants. Every child born of his bloodline would carry the power of life and death in their hands. Kelechi felt his heart sink. His curse wasn't just a result of his parents' deal with the gods. It was something far older, something tied to his very bloodline. Is there a way to break it? Kelechi asked, his voice trembling. The chief priest shook his head slowly. The curse is ancient, Kelechi. It cannot be undone. But you can learn to control it. That is the only way. Kelechi's hands clenched into fists. Control. How could he control something that had already taken so many lives? There is one place you might find the knowledge you seek, the chief priest continued, his voice solemn. In the village of Eleke, there are those who hold the secrets of the old ways. They may be able to help you understand your power. Kelechi looked up, his eyes filled with determination. Then I'll go. Chinonso's eyes widened in alarm. Eleke? That village? It's dangerous, Kelechi. People say the villagers there are cursed too. The chief priest nodded grimly. It is true. Eleke has its own dark history, and the people there are wary of outsiders. But if you wish to learn more about your curse, it is the only place to go. Kelechi's mind was made up. He couldn't live in ignorance any longer. He needed to understand his power, to control it, and if that meant going to Eleke, then so be it. I'll go, Kelechi said firmly, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. Chinonso glanced at his friend, his face pale but resolute. I'll go with you. The chief priest's eyes narrowed. It will not be an easy journey. You must be prepared for whatever awaits you in Eleke. Kelechi nodded, his hands steady now. I'm ready. The morning sun barely pierced through the thick canopy of the forest as Kelechi and Chinonso made their way toward Eleke village. The path was narrow and winding, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to close in around them. The air was heavy with moisture, and every step felt more uncertain than the last. Kelechi's mind was racing, filled with questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. What if the Unlumus couldn't help him? What if this curse truly had no solution? He glanced at Chinonso, who had been unusually quiet since they left the chief priest's house. Chinonso's usually cheerful expression was gone, replaced by a look of steely determination. Yet there was something else too, an underlying current of fear. "We're close," Chinonso muttered, his voice breaking the tense silence. "The village should be just beyond that hill." Kelechi nodded, his stomach tightening as the weight of the journey settled on him. He had heard stories about Eleke. It was a village shrouded in mystery, a place people from Oba spoke of only in whispers. It was said that the village had been cursed after a betrayal during the ancient war between their two lands. The people of Eleke harbored deep resentment toward outsiders, especially those from Oba. The idea of walking into that village made Kelechi's chest tighten with anxiety, but there was no turning back. He needed answers, and Eleke was his only hope. As they climbed the hill, the forest began to thin, revealing a small, secluded village nestled in the valley below. Eleke was not what Kelechi had expected. It was quiet, too quiet. There were no villagers bustling about, no children playing in the dirt. The huts were scattered haphazardly among the trees, and the smoke that rose from the few fires smelled of something unfamiliar, something almost metallic. Chinonso hesitated at the top of the hill, glancing at Kelechi. "Are you sure about this?" Kelechi took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I don't have a choice." Together, they descended into the village, their steps slow and cautious. As they approached, the villagers began to emerge from their homes, their faces pale and wary. Kelechi felt their eyes on him, sharp, mistrustful. The tension in the air was palpable. A group of men, dressed in worn leather tunics, stepped forward, blocking their path. The tallest of them, a man with a deep scar running across his cheek, narrowed his eyes. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Why have you come to Eleke?" Kelechi swallowed hard, keeping his voice steady. "We're here to see the Unlumas. We need their help." At the mention of the Unlumas, the men exchanged dark glances. The tall man took a step closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied Kelechi. "No one comes to Eleke for help," he spat, "especially not someone from Oba." Kelechi tensed, but before he could respond, Chinonso stepped forward. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said calmly. "We just need to speak with the Unlumas. Then we'll leave." The tall man's expression twisted into a sneer. "The Unlumas don't speak to outsiders, especially not to the cursed." His eyes lingered on Kelechi's pale skin and glowing blue eyes. Kelechi's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the villagers' suspicion, their hatred and fear. He had to think quickly. "I was born with a curse," Kelechi said, his voice steady but firm. "A curse that has followed my family for generations. The Unlumas are the only ones who can help me understand it." The tall man stared at him for a long moment, his jaw tight. The villagers behind him whispered among themselves, their eyes fixed on Kelechi with a mix of awe and fear. Finally the man nodded slowly, though his face remained hard. "Follow me." They were led through the village, past the watchful eyes of the villagers who seemed to grow more curious with every step. The path wound deeper into the forest, until they arrived at a small, worn-down shrine. Standing at its entrance were two elderly women, their faces lined with age and wisdom. Their eyes glowed with an otherworldly light as they looked at Kelechi, the Unlumas. Without a word, the two women motioned for Kelechi to step forward. He felt a strange pull, as though something deep within him was being drawn toward them. Chinonso gave him a reassuring nod, but Kelechi's legs trembled as he approached the women. The air around the shrine was thick with an ancient energy, and as Kelechi stood before the Unlumas, he felt it swirling around him, pressing against his skin. One of the women, her voice soft but filled with authority, spoke, "You have come seeking the truth about your curse." Kelechi nodded, his throat tight. "Yes. My parents made a deal with the gods before I was born, but they didn't tell me everything. I need to know. What am I?" Why was I cursed? The second woman's eyes flickered with a mixture of pity and sadness. It is not just the curse of your parents, child. It is the curse of your bloodline. A curse that was born of betrayal and spilled blood. Kelechi felt his stomach drop. Betrayal? The first woman nodded, her eyes locking onto his. Your ancestor, a king of Oba, made a pact with the gods long ago. He promised them great power, offerings, and devotion. But when the time came to honor that pact, he turned his back on them. He betrayed the gods, and in their wrath, they cursed his descendants. Every child born of his blood would carry the power of life and death in their hands. Kelechi's heart pounded in his chest. This was what the chief priest had hinted at, but hearing it now, laid bare, shook him to his core. Is there a way to break it? Kelechi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The second woman shook her head slowly. The curse is ancient and powerful. It cannot be undone, but you can learn to control it. Kelechi's hands trembled at his sides. He had feared this answer, but hearing it out loud felt like a crushing blow. Control it? He asked, his voice breaking. How? How can I control something that brings death? The first woman's gaze softened. You must learn to understand the power within you. It is not only a curse. It is also a gift. A terrible gift, yes, but a gift nonetheless. The power of life and death is a burden, but it is also a responsibility. You can choose how you use it. Kelechi shook his head, disbelief flooding him. I don't want this power. I never asked for it. The second woman stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. Her touch was gentle, but it sent a jolt of energy through Kelechi's body. You may not have asked for it, child, but it is yours. You must decide how to live with it. Kelechi's mind raced. The weight of the curse, the deaths he had already caused, it was all too much. But deep down, he knew the Unlumus were right. He couldn't run from this any longer. He had to face it, to control it. What do I need to do? Kelechi asked, his voice steady now, filled with determination. The Unlumus exchanged a glance, then nodded. You must leave this village, return to Oba, and learn to live with the power inside you. It will not be easy, but it is the only way. Kelechi felt a wave of relief, mixed with fear. The journey ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time, he felt a sense of clarity. He knew what he had to do. As Kelechi and Chinonso made their way back through the village, the villagers watched them in silence. The tension had not left the air, but something had changed. Kelechi no longer felt like a victim of his curse. He was ready to face it. As they climbed the hill and the village of Eleka disappeared behind them, Chinonso spoke up, breaking the silence. So, what now? Kelechi took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world settle on his shoulders. Now, we go home. I have a lot to learn. Chinonso nodded, his usual grin creeping back onto his face. I'm with you, every step of the way. Kelechi smiled faintly, grateful for his friend's loyalty. He knew the path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it. As they disappeared into the forest, the shadows that had once seemed so suffocating now felt like a part of him. Kelechi had been born into a legacy of darkness, but now he would learn to live with it. The curse was his, and he would carry it with strength. No longer would he run from it. He was ready to control his destiny. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed this story, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel Folktales King so that you won't miss any of our new videos. Here is another story I'm sure you will enjoy. Click on it to watch now